Yes, today's Bible reading comes in a continuation on the book of Daniel. So it's Daniel chapter 3 and can be found on page 1266 in the Pew Bibles. Daniel chapter 3. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 6 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and people of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into the blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations of the peoples of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to the king, "May the king live forever. Your Majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the gold image, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into the blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your Majesty. They neither serve your godly gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up." Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all other kinds of music, you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made. Very good. But if you do not worship it, you will all be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If you are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your Majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your Majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude towards them changed. He ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the fire so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, and these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement and asked his advisers, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fiery furnace?" They replied, "Certainly, your majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like some of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors and the royal advisers crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their head singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of the fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubbish, for no other God can save in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego in the province of Babylon. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks, Lynn. Now, no doubt you've heard the stats of the growing percentage of Australians marking no religion on the census, which of course is greeted with glee by the media. Sydney Morning Herald headline was this: "Abandoning God, Christianity plummets as non-religious surges in census." It was the middle of last year. The article went on to state that 44% of Australians identify as Christians, down from 61% a decade ago. The share of people ticking the no religion box grew from 22% in 2011 to 39% in 2021. The conclusion of the writer: Australia has become strikingly more godless over the past decade. The ABC started their article like this: "So Friedrich Nietzsche was right. God is dead and we have killed him." The ABC quotes philosopher Charles Taylor: "Modern civilization cannot but bring about a death of God." It's all a bit depressing, isn't it? We're a church about making Christ known, and to read this grieves us, doesn't it? Let me just say this though: no matter how bad things are here in Australia, and in fact, no matter how bad things can get, it's hard to imagine a situation worse for God's people than the one Lynn just read to us from Daniel chapter 3. Here we have the most powerful king, therefore with the most power to direct the affairs of state. He is, in Daniel 3, taking on that which is the hardest to control in society, seeking to bring about a uniformity in worship. The USSR tried and failed. China tried and now has got one of the largest Christian populations in the world. In Australia, this situation is difficult to imagine. The king commands all people to bow down to one statue. So this situation isn't building the Tower of Babel. That was tried on this place before, but this is worshipping the Tower of Babel, right? Yet it seems that Nebuchadnezzar has got all the authority required to pull this off. He's got the prefects, the governors, the advisors, the treasurers in lockstep behind him. He's even got the judiciary, the judges and the magistrates standing with him on this. What happens when the worship of God and of the God in heaven meets this level of threat? That's what we see in Daniel 3. So firstly, I want to just stop and feel the weight of the king's power to pull this off. That's where I want to start. And then secondly, I want us to see the surprising response of the one in power. So let's start with the king's demonstration of power. We've got this showdown between the most powerful king of the known world and the God of the exiles. You hear it in Nebuchadnezzar's question to the reluctant exiles. 3 men who wouldn't bow down among hundreds of the rich and famous who would. Speaking of the idol, the king asks the exiles, the end of verse 15, "But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Nebuchadnezzar recognizes the sheer power of his hand. He literally has power at his fingertips. I want you to do something you might not normally do as you read this passage. I want you to consider this passage from Nebuchadnezzar's point of view. I want to just invite you to put your megalomaniac on, right, as you read this passage. You see it there as it starts, verse 1. You've got it in front of you, chapter 3, verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high, 6 cubits wide, and set it on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Why? From the perspective of Nebuchadnezzar, why? Well, now we remember the background from last week, don't we? Nebuchadnezzar had a nightmare of a statue. Sure, he was the head of gold, but then came other kingdoms after him. Sure, they were inferior to him, but they still came. And then, of course, there was a rock that grew into a mountain that came and crushed the statue, including himself as the head of gold. Faced with this vision of the future, what would he do? What would you do? Well, Nebuchadnezzar does this. He builds not a head of gold, but a statue of gold. And he keeps, understandably, this statue away from mountains where they might get crushed. I need to secure my kingdom. That's what he's feeling. He does what all powerful people seek to do, unite the kingdom under his power. Understandable, right? A united kingdom is always stronger, and it seems that this is the plan for the statue, to bring about unity. One nation, one authority, same gods, including the God or the gold statue on this plain. And there's a symbolic moment that's used to reinforce this. You see it in verse 5, or you hear it in verse 5 rather. Verse 5, as soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Now remember, as a good megalomaniac, you need unity. You need everyone to be unified in their worship. You need a big stick for those who threaten this precious unity. And you see it there in verse 6. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. You can imagine next to the brick pits, there were these massive buildings heated with fire where bricks could be baked, ready for their all-purpose use. These furnaces were large enough and hot enough to promote that powerful sense of dread. So as a ruler, use carrots and sticks. This is a pretty good stick, isn't it? And it worked. Verse 7. Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Can you imagine how this would have felt? Can you hear the sound of the zither? No, neither can I. I was thinking the sound of bagpipes. You know, just in our theme with the coronation last night, on summer holidays, the Queen Elizabeth used to have bagpipes play to wake up the household on the summer holidays. You know, you can hear that, can't you? Every morning go those bagpipes. Everyone without fail woke up. Just like here. The moment every zither, lyre, horn played, everyone was bowing down and worshipping. Except one group. I mean, there's always one. Well, there's three. And so the snitchers came along to the king. Now, I was a bit surprised to read who the snitchers are here. They're not part of the A-list crowd that were invited to the statue opening. No, the snitchers were the astrologers who we met last week. The astrologers who, thanks to Daniel's quick and profound work, had their lives saved. Perhaps there was some professional jealousy there. I'm not sure. But see how they put the boot in here. Verse 12, they say this to Nebuchadnezzar. But there are some Jews who you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. Can you imagine the reaction to this? If you're Nebuchadnezzar, it worked, except it didn't. You want unity. You want everyone singing from the same hymn book. You've got the power to pull it off, the time, the effort, the amount of money that you've put into this to make it work. And this is what happens. Fury is the response. And you can feel this, can't you? I've built a statue. I've made my wishes extremely clear. I've set up a band. Everyone in the world was doing it, except you three couldn't get with the program. Except that's what he does. He doesn't say that, does he? Nebuchadnezzar leads with questions. Verse 14, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? After restating the rules, Nebuchadnezzar asks the most important question of the passage. End of verse 15. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Nebuchadnezzar believes that he is more powerful than anyone, anything else, including the gods. He has every resource, every magistrate, every provincial ruler in his pocket. Whatever he wants happens. Nebuchadnezzar believes that his destiny is in his hands. There is no question from him of outside power. There are many who live with us or around us who think exactly the same thing. You get what you want. Destiny is in your hands. They say things like, the only person you are destined to become is the person you decide to become. No one saves us but ourselves. Recognise that approach to life leaves no room for external power, no room for the power of God. This person will back the material success of power over the spiritual power every time. Now, friends, if we're honest, sometimes we like this too, aren't we? When we're faced with the census data, when we read the Sydney Morning Herald and watch the ABC, it's so easy for us to fall into this and feel that human authority rules, that God's power is somehow absent, that God's people have no power other than the power they pursue through human means. When you're in that place that no longer accounts for the working of God, when you're persuaded that power is only and can ever only be in the hands of humans, you need to read what happens next in Daniel 3. Nebuchadnezzar has thrown out a challenge. What God will be able to rescue you from my hands? And so that's what we see first, the power of Nebuchadnezzar. Let's look secondly at the surprising response of the one who is in power. God has worked in really obvious ways in the past. He's defeated armies by throwing them into confusion. He's knocked over statues of the Philistines like Dagon in 1 Samuel 5. He could have just knocked over this statue of gold. He could have done that, but he didn't. Instead, God does here what so often he does. He has chosen to work through the humble, righteous people who trust him. Now there are 3 exiles standing before the mighty King Nebuchadnezzar. Just quietly, I think they'd be a bit dirty with Daniel. Notice that Daniel isn't here in chapter 3. These guys have been left to do it by themselves. Don't know where Daniel is. Notice also that they are in this position as rulers of provinces on Daniel's recommendation, chapter 2, verse 47. I don't know whether they're dirty with Daniel. Perhaps that's just my take. But notice they didn't seek to justify themselves out of a situation like I'd be tempted to do, like we'd be tempted to. It would have been all too easy to convince themselves to bow the knee and just get along with the job. You know, thinking something like this, like we all know idolatry is false. There's nothing real here except a power trip of the king. What does it matter if I outwardly bow down? It doesn't mean that he controls my head and my heart. And if we die, the situations in our provinces will get worse. What use can we be to anyone dead? But if we stay alive, we can use our influence. Our voice will continue to be heard at the highest levels. Why not just to go along with the power trip and live to fight another day? Could you hear yourself saying that kind of thing? Notice they don't take this way out. Notice they don't get emotional either. This is surprising. They don't go all Braveheart. You can take away our names, but you can't take away our worship, like our faith. They don't make it about them. They make it about God. Nebuchadnezzar is going to blow up when he hears what they say because they have trusted one who's more powerful than him, and they know it. They say to the supreme king of the earth, we don't answer you, we answer to a higher power. Have a look at verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. That's gutsy, isn't it? And it doesn't stop there. They go on to show that there's one of two things that God could do here. Option 1, verse 17. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. And he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. That's option 1. Option 2. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of God you have set up. That is, the power is not in your hands, Nebuchadnezzar. The power belongs to our God. God is powerful, and so he'll save us if he wants. But he's also wise. He might have another plan, and he might not save us, and that's okay. These guys show their knowledge of the power of God. These guys show their commitment to the revealed word of God. And their faith here was saturated with expectation, but also displayed no presuming upon God. Charles Spurgeon, the English preacher of the 1800s, reflected on this passage. He said this, if an act of sin would increase my usefulness 10 times, I have no right to use it. And if an act of righteousness would appear likely to destroy all my apparent usefulness, I am to do it. It is yours and mine to do his will. Though the heavens fall, follow the command of God, whatever the consequences may be. That is strong meat, you say. Well, says Spurgeon, be strong men and eat it. And now we must be strong and eat it too, mustn't we? God chooses on this occasion to work through these humble, righteous, trusting people. This passage started with the mandate of worship and led to a question of God's power. And the passage ends with questioning God's amazing work and a mandate to protect it. First, the question. When the men are thrown into the furnace, which out of the king's fury burns so hot that even the strongest soldiers nearby dies, this is the question that Nebuchadnezzar asks. Verse 24, pick it up with me. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that we tied and threw into the fire? They replied, certainly, your majesty. He said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. Verse 27, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that their fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair on their head singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Incredible. And here comes the mandate. Verse 28. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their house be turned into piles of rubble. For no other God can save in this way." The question the passage asks is, do you believe this? Do you believe that no other God can save in this way? Do you believe that our God alone is both sovereign and powerful to save? 3 exiles showed remarkable resolve in trusting God's work. But brothers and sisters, I want to suggest to you that you have even more reason to trust in your saving God, because you live after Jesus. Jesus, who the devil took in Matthew 4 to the high place, showed him the kingdoms of the world. Matthew 4 verse 9, he said to him, "All these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." Then Jesus said to him, "Be gone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve." As Jesus hung on the cross, the leaders called out in Matthew 27:43, "He trusts in God, let God deliver him now, if he desires him. For he said, I am the Son of God." And the robbers who were crucified with him also reviled him in the same way. And God did deliver him. You see, in that last chapter of Matthew 28, as he came before his disciples, when they saw him, they worshipped him. God had delivered him. Brothers and sisters, your God is powerful to save. Your Lord is the pioneer and perfecter of faith. Do not lose heart. Trust him.